Hey friends. So in this video, what we're going to do is talk about the background to Kruger and Szanto on extended emotions. So the first bit of background you need, actually, let's talk about this. We need 3 bits of background, right? So the first one has to do with extended mind, which you've seen a little bit of with Clark and Chalmers. The second is with the variety of emotions and their components. And the third is with the structure of emotions, right? So let's talk about this. So a little bit of background on extended mind. As you've read with Clark and Chalmers, one way to think about the nature of the extended mind is that if there's stuff outside of my skull that, if that were inside of my skull, does things that would count as cognitive, then the stuff outside me counts as cognitive as well. So a paradigm example of this is with our phones and memory. So our cell phones store people's phone numbers, right? And it does this, right? And it does it by taking information and storing it. That was not helpful at all. But if that same process were to go on inside of me, we'd have no problem saying that I was remembering phone numbers. So the only difference then is where the information is stored. Is it stored inside the old noggin here, or is it stored in my phone? If that's the only difference, then my phone is acting just like my memory, right? In fact, my phone is my memory. It's part of my memory system. So that's Clark and Chalmers, and that's called a parity, P-A-R-I-T-Y, parity principle, right? Now, another version, what Kruger and Szanto call second wave extended mind, came out, sort of emerged out of Australia with these 2 guys, Richard Minari and John Sutton, and they emphasized not parity, but rather integration. So if stuff outside of me integrates with my onboard capabilities, satisfying certain kinds of constraints, then the stuff outside of me is part of my cognitive system. Right? So this works a little bit differently, right? Instead of talking about functional similarity of stuff inside and outside of my head, we're talking about like a meshing of stuff inside and outside of my head. So this is important because I think for extended mind, extended emotions to get off the ground, we need that second version, right? We need the integrationist version. And I'm happy to gab with folks why, but I won't take the time right now. So we need the world outside the head to mesh with stuff inside of us in order for emotions to extend across the skin barrier, across the organismic barrier. So that's the first bit of background, right? Extended mind. Now, the second bit of background are the variety of emotions and their components. So we think about what an emotion is. Kruger and Szanto suggest a few things. They suggest that there is a bodily affect component to emotions. That is to say, there's a certain bodily feel to emotions. Like when you're angry, right? You feel, right? Or when you're happy, you're, right? There's a phenomenal feel to it. Second, there's also existential feelings, right? As another kind of emotion. So we can be happy, right? Like, happy when you park illegally and you get back and you don't get a ticket. Hey, that's a different kind of happiness than the kind of happiness you realize, I don't know, perhaps being a parent, right? Or perhaps, you have this huge moment of appreciation for mentors and parents and guardians in your life, right? Or the person you love very much, right? These are kind of existential feelings, right? And so we want to make sure we distinguish those as a kind of emotion. We also have moods, right? A mood is a distinct kind of sort of emotional state, right? Where if we're in a good mood, right, as we sort of feel a certain way, and we tend to engage the world in a certain way, and we tend to process information in a certain way, as opposed to whether or not we're in a bad mood. Right? People also have temperaments, right? So while moods can change pretty fluidly, a person's temperament seems to be a bit more stable. So you might describe yourself as having an optimistic temperament or a pessimistic temperament. But those seem to be much more stable, although they too can change. And Kruger and Szanto go on to describe a few more varieties of emotions and their components. The key takeaway here is that we want to make sure, whatever our account is of extended emotions, we want to make sure that we cover the full range of stuff that's out there. We don't want to just focus on garden variety emotions like I feel happy and I feel sad and I feel angry. We want to make sure we capture the full spectrum. Finally, the structure of emotions. So what do we mean by this? Well, what we mean is the sort of, you can think of it as like the pieces of an emotion, right? The components of an emotion. So Kruger and Szanto go with an account from Shearer that came out in 2005, and I think it's a nice comprehensive account, so we'll just stick with that, although they do mention others. So emotions have an evaluative component, right? So if we are angry about something, we think that the thing is bad. If we're happy about something, we think the thing is good, right? That's the evaluative component. Second, there is the neurophysiological component. So whenever we have an emotion, whenever we're in an emotional state, stuff is going on in our brains, going on in our pituitary gland, going on in our hearts. There's this huge range of bodily reactions, right? And those are part of emotions. Next, we have the motivational component. And we saw this with Hume, right? That emotions can motivate us to do certain things. If you're angry about injustice, that motivates you to go out and do something. Next, emotions have an expressive component. That is to say that, when we part of being happy is smiling, right? And the smiling is the expressive part of being happy. Finally, there's perhaps the most familiar, but hardest to sort of articulate, is the subjective feeling component, right? What an emotion feels like. And we know what this is, right? We've all had these experiences, but it's hard to say just what it is. But it's there, we want to make sure that it's accounted for. So we have these 5 parts of emotional experiences: the evaluative component, the neurophysiological part, the motivational part, the expressive part, and the subjective feeling part. Now, a key takeaway here is that for emotions to be extended, it's not enough that the world outside of us affects us emotionally, but rather that our emotions affect the world outside of us as well. That is to say, there has to be a two-way causal relationship, a two-way influence. It's not enough for the world to affect us. That much is obvious. But we also have to think about the ways in which we affect the world. And we'll get into that in the next video.